So I want to start, with the beginning. As I was asking you outside, I'm so curious how much time was spent on this. Take me back to when you started on this project and working on it together.
I think that the project took about a year or so to make. I think that one of the ways that we pitched the project is that we wanted to make a film about the history of African Americans and the police and the fraught relationship, and that we wanted to base it kind of around a current case, and that we knew that we could start the film and start the historical research and start some of the other research. And, it's sad to say, but we said to ABC, and we know that something will happen, while we're preparing the film. And Amir Locke was shot and killed, and we went with his story. But it's sad to say that we, knew that there would be another case that we could base it on.
Yeah. And Valerie, I read, a previous article where you talked about you were initially sort of hesitant to come on for, a subject this difficult, a topic this big, and ultimately what changed your mind. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. When Stanley asked me if I wanted to work on a project that looked at the history of Black people in law enforcement, or a different one, I definitely hesitated, and partly because it's such a difficult topic. And it's, stressful. And Stanley said to me, well, wait, don't you have a son? Which I do. He's 16. And so I thought, okay, that's really a good point. This is something that's a concern for me when he walks home. And then another reason was, I guess I talked to my family, and my husband pointed out, he's like, well, now you can contribute to the conversation if you work on something about this issue versus just getting angry at the television when I see it. And so those were the reasons why I did it, or why I decided to come on board and work with Stanley on this project.
Okay. And kind of to that point, and what you're mentioning about working on this in real time in the midst of Amir Locke and that tragedy going on, what was that like emotionally, and kind of, processing that at the same time that you're working on this bigger piece?
Well, I think one of the first shoots we did was Amir Locke. So I hadn't, we hadn't interviewed any historians or experts as yet. Okay. So, of course it was really challenging, very difficult to witness their pain. I think, though, that, they wanted to have the story come out so that people would, not forget their son, and that they would, work towards, they're very focused on no-knocks, but just in general, law enforcement issues with Black people. So in that sense, I felt like it was important to bear witness to their pain.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that Valerie, almost ran down to Minneapolis to and got there and was able to shoot Amir Locke's funeral, and we were able to get there right away. I think one of the things that really helped in making the film was at the end you see Amir's parents, and that was a year later. And we went back and filmed them a year later, and that's where the mother is so emotional, and he's gone. At that point, he's still gone. He's going to be gone. I want to thank them because they were just so beautiful and courageous to be able to sit down for those interviews.
And I want to talk about the title, as well. Obviously, I'm sure like everyone thought of the KRS-One, song, which I know it is a nod to. But, I also felt as the story kind of built, there was this double meaning. Almost the sound of the police is the sound of society, and what they're upholding. Can you talk about, deciding on the title?
Yeah, I think from the very beginning, I think the title of the film was Sound of the Police. After the KRS song. We didn't know that we would actually use the KRS song. And if anybody wants to talk about using hip hop music, during the reception, that's a longer conversation because it's not simple. But we thought that it's the sound of the police, and the sound of the police means different things to different people. and the sound of the police can mean a whole different thing to the African American community, and also the hip hop music that we used became integral to the film, and so we went with it, and ABC Studios, luckily, we said we wanted to use this music, and probably the music budget was going to be a little bit more than we had originally thought it would be. It wasn't that much more, but it was more, and it's also jumping through hoops to get permission to use hip hop music sometimes.
And also, you talked about that the sound of the police means different things to different people, but it also kind of struck me. I feel like there's no ambiguity, like in the documentary, and just the through point when you talk about, the Fugitive Slave Act, and that it was like everyone's responsibility to police Black people at the time. And, my first thought came, to Trayvon Martin and that whole conversation around, watching and, neighborhood watch and that. But, your next scene goes straight to Central Park here and like that present day through point. Can you talk about building that narrative? And did you know that's where you were going with this kind of when you started?
Yeah, I'll let Valerie talk about this a little bit too, but yeah, we knew from the beginning that that's where we wanted to go, that we wanted it to be historical context. We knew that, that people say, they'll trace it back to George Floyd or Trayvon Martin or the Black Panthers, but we would use a term when we were making the film that it's built into the cake, it's baked into the cake of the United States, and we wanted to show that's it. It's always been this kind of relationship, and it's never been a relationship where African American people could say the police are there to protect and serve them, and we wanted to lay it out there, because so many times, when we talk about the police, at least in public, at least in the media, at least on TV, they'll be like, oh, the police are bad, but they have a hard job to do, but there's just some bad officers, but they have a hard job, and and it's like, no, that's not the way we talk about the police when nobody's around.
Yeah, I think we were trying to establish how people know this is a problem. So whenever I say to anybody I was working on this documentary, they'd all nod their heads like, yeah, clearly we have a problem, but they don't know why we have a problem. And so if you don't go back to the very beginning to try to understand that relationship, you'll never really understand it. And I think we have no narration in the documentary, so therefore we had to really use juxtaposition to sort of make the point of like, you see this thing about that was the law back then, that every white person had to sort of be able to monitor any Black person. Well, that idea, that thought, that unconscious or conscious idea remains with us, and by putting those two things together, it kind of makes the point.
Yeah, absolutely. It was also striking to me to get police officers, to be a part of this. Was that difficult? And generally with sources, were there people who were hesitant to be a part of the project?
I think with the chief of police in Oakland, I think we found him he was already interviewed in a sort of, I think, LA Times article or something. So it sounded like he was already, thinking about getting rid of, or had already gotten rid of, driving while Black, and had tried to be more strategic with, how he went about things. So he was already a believer in bias, and he's Black and he gets stopped himself, as chief of police, he still gets stopped. So, so he was already, working towards that. So, the law enforcement that spoke to us had already been engaged in change, had already recognized that they needed to acknowledge the past. Do you know what I mean? So in that sense, they wanted to talk about it, but Okay.
Yeah, I think, it was always our aim and crucial to us that we get police officers, in the film and to talk, because, they're on the front line and so many of them see a problem too, Yeah.
Kind of to that point, who was this documentary made for?
Everybody.
Okay.
I think it's made for everybody. I think that one of the things that I wanted to do in this film, and kind of in all the films that I work on, is to tell African Americans something that's new, that they haven't seen before. And I think that if I do that, then I definitely will be telling white folks something that they haven't seen before. So we wanted to be clear that we're not just saying, like in the Tarzan movies, where they hear the drum and they turn to the natives and say, what are the drums saying? We're not trying to tell just tell white folks like what the drums are saying. We're trying to put it together in a way that will be new also to black folks, or put it out there in a way in the public, so that we can at least discuss it, because the police are a real problem.
Yeah. And to that, as a black person, I was like, oh, should I say this? Because I also thought, the entertainment connection was really interesting. I remember around George Floyd's death, and there was a lot of conversation about the narrative of police in scripted television, but then, Cops was taken off the air because of that. But when you made the connection with Dragnet and actual police officers selling scripts, for that just stuck out to me, so much. Had you all been aware of those things already? Was there anything new that you all discovered in this process?
Well, certainly we knew about all the TV shows, we all are conscious of how many. You're thinking, what, another police show? But they have so many that, I grew up with, and, and we know about Dragnet, whether we grew up with it or not. And I think that it was a surprise and helpful to the documentary that the gentleman we interviewed had also not only been in law enforcement, but had written the scripts, because he could then speak so clearly, we thought, to the idea of, here's this sort of made up thing, but this isn't what these black people were experiencing, because he was part of both. And he also thought the whole idea of just rounding up people and, made no sense, and that he also could see that there was a lot of, lack of trust there for good reason, So I think that was helpful to have the person wear both hats and talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where we show all the titles of the TV shows, was kind of just in some ways a fun sequence, and there's few fun sequences in this movie, so it was fun. But also, even though we knew it and everybody knows it, when you see it all cut together, you just realize that that there are these cop shows, and 99% of the time, the cops are doing the right thing and are good people and are trying to do what's right by the community, and it's a very different thing so many times when African Americans hear sound of the police. And so I was kind of shocked, how it looked when it was all cut together, even though we talked about it and we knew there were a lot of cop shows. Yeah.
I think it hopefully makes a point that as Stanley was saying as Stanley was saying about the police officers, I mean, hopefully it's making the idea that the system of policing is what, it's not the individual officer necessarily as much as it's about the system.
Yeah. And, with the editing, can you talk about the tone a bit? Because I do feel like, as an African-American viewer, I didn't feel re-traumatized, watching it. But the point, that's a big conversation, people feel trauma porn, all of that.
Right.
But it still gets the point across. Can you talk about striking that balance?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we struggled with a lot, because we didn't want it to be trauma porn, and we wanted to stay away from it being trauma porn. Valerie was our trauma porn meter. We're like, okay, Valerie, what do you think? What do you think about this? No. She's like, oh no, it's too much. I mean, and we had to take a lot of stuff out. I mean, if you think it was bad, we had to take stuff out, because it was just too much. But also, we wanted to make sure that the audience couldn't say, oh, that was just a bad cop. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was just a bad cop. He had a bad day. Oh, you just picked some bad clips. No, it's over and over and over again. And so that's what we wanted to kind of establish. But we worked really hard, and hopefully it does build, and it weighs on you, but hopefully there weren't too many times where you felt like it went over into trauma porn, and because we really struggled not to do that.
Yeah. You did. Job well done. And a kind of question, because, when I first read, before I jumped into the documentary, I was like, this could almost be a series, just thinking of the span of time. But then after, it's like, how many more examples do we need? The point kind of remains the same. But I'm curious, did you envision something longer? Were you thinking series? How did you settle on, hour and 25 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, we were never thinking about a series. I think it's a one shot. So we never, and I think the story kind of dictated the length. I mean, I think it was originally thought of as being like an hour, 90 minutes to 2 hours, and it was like, okay, we've made our point. There's no point in kind of just stretching it out. Yeah. And I think that to ABC and Hulu's credit, they didn't say, okay, could it, our contract to do 2 hours, so could it be longer? It's like, no, this is the film, and the film is what it is, and it works at the length it works at.
Okay. Well, lastly, one of the points the documentary kind of ends on is that we haven't seen that structural change yet, because as much as we're good at reacting, we're also good at forgetting. So I'm curious, what are your hopes for where this documentary travels? What are your hopes for structural change actually coming?
Well, I mean, I think my hope is that, one, that people will watch it, and that, that people will, for me, this was like a journey of learning, both from Stanley, the filmmaker, and also from the historians and experts about this legacy. I mean, I kind of knew some of it, but I didn't know all of it, and I still don't know all of it. But I think that, what I'd hope would be that people would, take this information and work in their own communities. One of the things is we have a lot of different independent police departments. So then it's not like a national organization, So each city, each community, each county has their own, policies. But I think it's a matter of working with your city government or your law enforcement to try to affect change and to for their sake too, and for everybody else's sake. So I think Stanley mentions, you can tell the story about the police officer and how they feel about going into communities where people don't want them there.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a police officer, and he said that can you imagine how it feels when you go into an African American community and you get out of the car and everybody's staring at you, with hostility and hate, and can you imagine like how that affects you day to day? And it doesn't have to be that way. So, that's the hope that the film will contribute to some kind of change. I think, it's on Hulu, so please let people know that it's on Hulu. But, I think that the film, just in the last 5 years or so, the film is received very differently than it would have been 5 years ago. I think that if we had shown the film 5 or 10 years ago, there would be so much skepticism from audiences, and they'd be like, oh, well, how could you do that? But, we don't get any of that because people understand that this is where the police are and that there needs to be reform. So I thought, we're not thinking that the film is gonna, people are gonna run out and join the anti-police league or something like that. But hopefully it'll start. It's a slow process, but that people will realize that change needs to be made, and that's the first step. That if people understand that change needs to be made, and that that they remember, the look on Amir Locke's father's face at the end, when he
Yeah.
says, that was my son, that was killed.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to open it up for a few audience questions. If you have one, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you so much. I love the film. I learned several new things that have really stuck with me. Specifically that I had never seen that example in New Jersey where you just have the, the way that the police treated the white person and the black, that's sticking with me forever, I think. Was that a huge news story, or was that just something you guys found?
It was a small news story, but
Yeah.
it was
Oh,
a news
wow.
story.
It is profound, as incredible. I was curious, the question of, as a fellow documentary filmmaker, I felt that the pacing was great, and I know when you don't really have a protagonist per se to follow, that in the edit that could be quite the struggle. So I was just curious how you guys wrapped your mind around like the spine and the pacing of the film, because I was held captive the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a couple of givens that we had, and that helped us structure the film, so that we got to Amir Locke's funeral, and so we knew that we wanted to start there, and open it up there, and then go back, and that we wanted to kind of have this structure where we went back to the past and talked about slave catchers, and then we went to the present and talked about Karens, and then we went back to the past, and so it was a back and forth, and that at some point we wanted to not keep going back and forth, because you get tired of it as an audience, and we wanted to stay in the present. So halfway through or so, we kind of stopped going back to the past. So we knew those things, and then the rest of it, like any film, I guess, it was a puzzle that we had to put together, because it wasn't like the film that I did right before this, Attica, which had a clear structure. It's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Or the film on the Black Panthers, which starts in the beginning and goes to the end of the Panthers. But this film didn't have that natural structure, so it was a bit about pacing. So where do we drop the cop shows? Let's drop it at a point where you need a kick in the butt, as an audience, like you need to get raised up. So all of that was in the mix of making this film.
Yeah, I think seeing it's like a puzzle is a good way to put it. I mean, we tried different things, moving this here, moving that there, the Great Migration, how do we come out of that, and so if you come out of that with Driving While Black, it kind of makes it point. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think we tried things, sometimes we're like, no, you know what I mean? And then we try something else, but I think it was always with the idea of, again, also being driven by having no narrator. So how can you push the story forward with juxtaposition?
Hello. I'm just curious about the body camera footage of the police officers or on their cars, and the idea that that's supposed to be the way to police the police. And what I'm understanding is possibly that the unions and the way the structures are set up, that's not ever really going to be providing our hopes of what those body camera footage shows us. Is that what's happening with body cam footage and police officers, and how are the unions reacting to these enforcements and things like that?
Well, I mean, that's not an expert on that, really. I think that you'd have to ask one of the people in our film, you know what I mean, about body cam footage. I mean, I think that, for our purposes, when we had it, we used it. I mean, I don't think that body cam footage necessarily, as you could see in the film, necessarily protects people all the time. Do you know what I mean? Because things happen, you know what I mean? And that's, people lose their tempers or they get frightened, and who cares about the body cam footage when that's happening? Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't necessarily protect. But as for your larger question, I don't have the answer to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think body cam footage has made a big difference, in terms of us seeing and us knowing. I don't know if it's made a big difference in police actions. In some weird way, the body cam footage is so bad that I hope it hasn't made a difference, because if it's made a difference, then what were they doing before? But it has made a difference because we see it, and I think body cam footage is here to stay, because it's not, what can the police say? They can't say, oh, well, there's nothing there, so we shouldn't do it. Body cam footage has been crucial in so many instances to understand the actions of the police and what the actions of the police really are.
And this will be the last question.
One of the real interesting segments of your film was the Dinkins kind of revolt. It was kind of reminiscent of the January 6th kind of events. And is the system, it was kind of startling because I hadn't been aware of that kind of public reaction to a simple to an official trying to get the police accountable. Has that changed at all? Is it any different at all? Is it still do you still get that kind of reaction in society?
I don't think there's been much change. I mean, there hasn't been a structural change. The Civilian Review Board did not come into being the thing that Dinkins wanted. The police are still. I'm from New York City. I live in New York City now. The police are still incredibly powerful in New York City, and that was, as you say, it was a police riot that was really forgotten, and just forgotten. So, and again, I hope the film makes the case that that Dinkins just wanted a civilian review board, of police, and not, I think, even number of police and civilians on the civilian review, what's called a civilian review board.
Yeah, I think that as somebody said in the documentary, sometimes when the civilian review board or reform, it's sort of like it positions it as anarchy. Like if you want to say, if you want to hold the police accountable, then it says that you want anarchy. But truly, that's not what people are saying. They're really saying they just want to improve things, but maybe that's part of the reaction.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all over the country, and I don't know if it's a reaction to some of the calls for defund the police or abolish the police. I don't know if it's that, but it seems like in some ways the police just doing their job has gotten a lot worse. And I don't know exactly the situation here in California. Again, I got here today, but I hear about San Francisco and L.A. in New York. The police are not even trying to do their job, and there's multiple cases of just so I mean, I live in Harlem, and I live in a series of brownstones. And we had a meeting with the police, the tenants, the community, and the police came. 5 police officers came, and they said, people said, well, people are shooting up, on our stoops and smoking crack on our stoops and having sex in our yard. And the police said to us, looked us in the face and said, do not call us about any of that stuff. We're not going to come. We're not going to come. If you call and say somebody's smoking crack on our steps, we're not going to come. If you call and say somebody's shooting up, we're not going to come. And if you want the police to come, then you should petition your city council member or your Congress member, because at this point, that's not our job. We're not going to deal with it. That's the state of New York.
That's a note to end on. But thank you. But thank you both so much.
But, you know, step on out to the lobby and have some drinks. And, and it's good to be alive.
Yes. But thank you both so much for being here
Thank
and
you.
sharing your insights. Thank you all for being here.